What is up, Oak Life Familia? It is Chris and Greg and Chris back at it again with another Roots and Branches. This time we got a special guest, and we're going to be talking about the future of Christianity.
Yeah, look, I get crazy when the mic round. No sense of getting hyped now, but I'm
Special guest Charlotte Ashlock in the building. What is up? If you're tuning in with us, checking us out live, please engage. Ask questions, make comments, be active in the chat. It's going to be a fun conversation. Also, if you notice, it's 4 o'clock. We're going to try and keep the Roots and Branches segment at 4 p.m. on Monday. So thanks for rocking with us. Oh, hi, the future. Oh, nice. Okay. Oh, the future. Nice. Good stuff. Oh, man. I might have to switch the background if we're going to be pulling up comments because it looks weird. But anyway, enough about that. Chris, what's up, man? How you doing?
I'm hanging in there. My arm's broken, turns out. So I've got a weird little setup here at the splint. I can't lift it up.
Oh, no. Is it still hurting?
Yeah, it's hurting pretty bad. Although I'm on some good pain meds, so that helps.
Mm-hmm.
Jeez.
Nothing like discussing controversial and important topics while hopped up on pain meds.
Exactly. That's part of the reason I'm so excited. I was like, this will be a fun one. But yeah, so Charlotte and I were talking, and she was like, "Oh, do you want to talk about the future of Christianity?" I was like, "I'd love to have a conversation about that. We should record that." Because I think about that. I think it's a really fun conversation, and there's a lot of ways to take it. And so, yeah, Alma, hi, good to see you. Yeah, I know. Thanks for the sympathy. Thankfully, bodies heal, and hopefully, it won't be too bad. But yeah, so what for you, Charlotte? Why was this an interesting conversation?
Yeah, well, so I was raised atheist, and my first boyfriend, and actually also my last boyfriend that I had, were like, oh, Christianity just sort of needs to vanish from the face of the earth for the world to improve. And as a Christian, obviously, I believe that the institution has value, or I wouldn't participate in it. And even among progressive Christians, you constantly see stuff like, oh, I hate the church, but I'm a Christ follower, or religion sucks, but I follow Jesus. And I feel like that's the logical extension of American individualism, where all that matters is what you do as an individual. And it's very disparaging of the potential of collective and community efforts to change the world. And it really bothers me. And the total despair among both progressive Christians and atheists about the potential to make institutions valuable and worthwhile instead of destructive and evil is something I'd like to challenge, and something I have a lot of hope about for very specific reasons. But also, I wonder how we can be better leaders about guiding ourselves into the future we want to see.
That's so good. Yeah. I don't know what else we need to say there.
Well, what I'm curious to ask you, Chris, is why do you have enough hope in the church to bother leading one?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Jeez. Ping pong right back at you. Shoot you with a Jesus juke.
That's a good one. I mean, I've seen it. So I've seen the immeasurable value of a community that has this hope and is trying to walk the path of love. Mm-hmm. And they're it's not like I've lived a life that I can say I can claim by comparison to all spaces or all communities, but there's something really unique about church, people gathered around Jesus, and when that plays out, and when the intangible, miraculous work of God happens, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. I've been a part of lots of communities. I'm in an A's fan group, and it's awesome. It's great community, but there's something different around these ideas, these stories, these rituals that draws us deeper into our humanity, and I think into a connection to the world it's just unique. So I think for me, part of the reason I believe in it enough to have helped start one is that there's something I've seen that I've tasted that I really like believe in. I want other people to experience, and like it's kind of addicting once you start to see what like how beautiful a community like this can be. And then the separate issue would be I've been a part of enough and seen enough spaces that have been hurtful that I know there needs to be a counterbalance and a different perspective rather than what I think a lot of people think of when they think of like negative Christianity in America. But as far as like the broad strokes of history, what's next for Christianity, I think there's a lot of different discussion there, because I think the question becomes, well, where? Like, do you mean in North America? Do you mean in the global South? Do you mean because I think it's the statistics are like, if the majority of Christians currently aren't in the global South, they will be very soon. And so what does that mean for like where the center of gravity of Christianity is? Historically, in the last couple millennia, I guess it's been like Eurocentric. But I think the numbers are decreasing as far as people who identify as Christians in North America and Europe, or in Western countries. Mm-hmm. So the fastest growing churches are like illegal churches in China and rural churches in South America and Southeast Asia and in Africa as well. And so that'll be interesting to see what happens next. Mm-hmm. Like if Christianity dies out in the West, but it's becomes the most common religion of the global South, like what does that mean for the future of Christianity?
Yeah, the Christianity future I'm most interested in discussing is in my own country, because that's where I have the power to influence the direction the conversation goes. And I looked at this Pew Research Center study on the ways in which Christianity was growing and shrinking, and it's growing more through birth rate, and it's shrinking in terms of conversions. More people are deconverting than converting. And so what that says for me is that people are currently finding the message to be not compelling and not something they want to be part of, because they're joining it by being born into it much more so than they're joining it because they choose it. And I think that some of the places you mentioned, like the churches in China that are being oppressed, are actually, they're clearly offering a message that is compelling enough that people risk persecution for it. So the Pew Research study is just like overall, it doesn't cover those very specific cases you mentioned, but I think that it's worth examining that, millennials are finding the faith of their parents so bankrupt in its messaging and so disconnected from their values. Because when I look at the larger history of Christianity, I see that there are these sort of cycles of corruption and renewal. And rather than being like my ex-boyfriends and being like, let's just get rid of the whole thing, I'm like, we're currently in the downswing of a corruption cycle. And that's a really spiritually toxic atmosphere to grow up in. And that's why I feel so terrible. But that also means we're due to go upward on the renewal swing next if we seize the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Do you think how much further do we have to go in the downward portion of that?
I think it's up to the courageousness of our moral leadership, which frankly right now is lacking, because people would rather just complain and whine that, the bad guys are winning than try to beat the bad guys. And it makes me so angry. Like, Greg, what's that face?
I'm just excited. I am vibing with everything you're saying, Charlotte. You're just speaking my heart right now, and I am sorry for my face interrupting you. Keep it going.
No,
Keep it going.
I love that facial expression. Yeah. So, my older LGBT Christian mentors, namely Ed Ness and his friend Connie, and their friend Marcia Stevens-Pino, who is one of the first contemporary Christian musicians and also a lesbian, for our viewers who haven't heard of them. So these people have taught me that the extreme corruption in American Christianity is relatively recent, that Christianity used to be fairly apolitical, and Republicans pursued this deliberate stratagem to equate republicanism with Christianity, and that within living memory, this was not the case. They stole it from us, and we have to steal it back. And I'm not going to let anyone steal Jesus from me or tell me that Jesus doesn't belong to me because I'm socialist, because I'm bisexual, or whatever the case is. And the way people just lie down and let the theft happen and cry and be like, oh, I guess I have to live my life without Jesus now. I accept that what the Republicans are telling me, that he doesn't belong to me, is true. That just makes me sad. It makes me say, like, show some backbone. Like, if you value it, fight back for it. Don't let something you value be taken from you. If you don't value it, that's one thing. But they're expressing this very deep heartbreak that something they value greatly, spiritual community and spiritual meaning, is being robbed from them by these abusive practices. And if someone punches you, then you shouldn't just like lie there on the floor and be like, I've been punched, I guess I give up now. And I know that's like, it feels harsh, but I'm fed up. I feel like I'm getting up and everyone is just lying on the floor being like, what can we do? Like, American Christianity is corrupt, I give up now. I hope that isn't like a self-centered thing for me to say, but it's what I feel like when I read Twitter. Everyone is being like, oh, it's all fucked, let's give up. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, and I think some of it is, though. Like, I think that there's part of me, yes to everything you're saying, and also, like, I think there are pieces of the institution in America in particular that needs to die off. Like, there's a style of Christianity in our country that is it's tied to nationalism and cult of personality and patriarchy and individualism and consumerism. Like, and I think a lot of people are rejecting that. And I would say, like, yeah, that thing should die off. Let's build something new together, and not lose the essence of the faith, but all the trappings of it. Like, megachurch culture is essentially what I'm talking about, which has become the dominant form of, you could say, American Christianity. There is the mainliners, like, that have a different take on things, and they're also shrinking, but in a different way than the evangelicals. And so, I don't know, on both sides, there are probably things that need to be pruned. And I don't know if we're close to the end of it. I think, like, you know, you can look to Europe as potentially the precursor of North America. Like, we tend to follow cultural patterns there. And we've got a few more decades at least before we bottom out, where there's things to let go of. And that's not to say we should give up at all, because I love your heart there. And I think that's part of the reason we like things like Oak Life happen, because, yeah, there's something still valuable here we don't want to lose. We just want to recontextualize it. And yeah, build something new. But a lot of those spaces that are out there, like, we run in different streams, so that we can do what we do here, but there's still going to be all those things happening over there. And I don't know how to affect change there besides building something different and beautiful and compelling.
Yeah, well, I'm really fascinated by the history of the Protestant Reformation. And I read this biography of Martin Luther that I just love called A World Ablaze or something like that. I can send you the link for the description later. But it talks about how really what caused the Protestant Reformation was the invention of the printing press. Because the church hierarchy of the Catholic Church had this very tight control of information. Like, even things were in Latin. Only the educated elite that they trusted could convey this spiritual information. And then translating spiritual arguments and the Bible into contemporary languages and making them widely available was the underlying force behind the Reformation. And Luther just happened to be one of the sparks that set it ablaze. But it was a tinder house because of the printing press. And what has recently been invented? The internet. And I feel like we haven't got our Martin Luther yet. We've got his, or her, because probably it'll be a woman this time. We've got her predecessors available. Rachel Held Evans, Nadia Bolz-Weber, Sarah Bessey. They're sort of like laying some groundwork. But the cultural patterns follow the patterns of distribution of media. And the reason Republican Christians got so much power is they seized control of the apparatus of media. And so I work as a book publisher for a living. And so when we looked into could my company like publish Christian books successfully that had a more progressive message, the answer was no, because the Baptists and the conservatives essentially controlled the Christian bookstores, the Christian publishing houses. They had this whole distribution chain that was separate from the main book distribution chain that they weren't going to let any progressive authors into. And Rachel Held Evans like has this whole blog post about how she was celebrating when the Lifeway bookstore chain like closed for that reason, because they were using their media power as a power of censorship. And just as they're doing it in books, they're doing it in, you know, online conferences and online magazines and print magazines. In all these powerful distribution channels, they're curating their messages to keep these more progressive voices out. And they're really distorting the nature of the conversation, because there are voices, there are people who need this progressive Christian information, but the information isn't getting out there. And another author I really admire, Sheila Ray Gregoire, who she started out in the conservative Christian community, and she made it her mission to challenge women experiencing abuse and sexism and lack of orgasms in their marriage. Like, she did a lot of really popular Christian sexuality content. And I was reading a blog post from her recently, and she talked about how she had to basically kiss up to conservatives to grow her platform. And then once her platform was grown enough that she had a large mailing list, she could start trying to criticize them, in particular Emerson Eggerick and his message of love and respect, which is basically pro-men abusing women. She was able to challenge him and prove statistically the damage he was doing. And she said once she did that, like all the conservative outlets were not willing to feature her. So there's this very, very heavy system of censorship which has been enacted over the past couple of decades. And just like, the Catholic Church had this system of only priests who know Latin get to argue theology. And I think the internet gives us the tools we need to break that iron ring of censorship and actually get attention to the voices that the people crave spiritually. Mm-hmm.
Hey, Charlotte, you said that we don't have our current Martin Luther figure. I think we do, and I think the name of our Martin Luther figure is Charlotte Ashlock right there. I don't think I'm alone in that, right? So we got Facebook user. See?
Oh my
Yang.
gosh.
We got another Facebook user. Yo, Charlotte, I've always appreciated your perspective. Your context is so unique because you are a newer Christian with none of the baggage that I've carried, and I mean like everyone else at Oak Life, from my past. And I think that makes your view so unique. And again,
Facebook user.
A bunch of hearts. You even got a yee from Matthew. You know what I'm saying? It's really good. It's really good. And your perspective, to your point, is necessary. It's timely and it's unique. I haven't heard this argument before, but the need for reformation, for change, the emergent church that was a big thing in the early 2000s. It's interesting. I'm in a class reviewing when the emergent church hit the scene, and the conversations they're having are identical to the conversations we're having, not only at Oak Life, but just in Christian circles, even outside of Oak Life. I have other circles that I'm a part of, and they're hearing the same thing, this need for something different. So the need's there, and you have a strategy that's unique, that's different. I like it. So anyway.
Can you say more about the parallels between the 2000s movement and this movement, and why you think that the problems still persist?
It's a good question. I think I'll respond with the latter. The problem still persists because ultimately power dynamics have not changed. And until the power dynamics change, the problems will resurface in new forms and new ways. The problems that were argued in the early 2000s was that church became more religiously structured and more focused on what to do and not why we're doing it, and more the do as I say, don't have any questions. Like, you just have to follow. There's a sense of respect and disrespect if you question things, and questions in general become problematic. I was surfing through TikTok, and some young individual was like, I have a answer for all progressive Christianity. And the answer is, you're not God, so deal with it. If it says it in the Bible, you're not God. So just because you don't feel like doing it, then so what, you know? And I was just like, wow, and this is a young individual. It's not an individual who is like from the old way of thinking, but this individual is being fed the old way of thinking. So
yeah, it kind of misunderstands what the nature of a book is. Like, I don't pick up any book and be like, I have to do exactly what it says in this book. There's a hero, there's a villain. There may be some ambiguity about who's the hero, who's the villain. The point is to engage with the story, and actually just directly copying the characters would be idiotic with any book. So it bewilders me how people forget that the Bible is a book. It is a story when they read it. It's not an IKEA manual. You can't follow a story like it was an IKEA manual.
That's so good. That's so good. Rachel Held Evans pulled a lot from Peter Enns that has similar notions around how we look at this book. Because yes, it is a story, but then you have a lot of atheist arguments that's saying, hey, why would I follow some story? Why don't I just follow Harry Potter if I'm going to follow this Bible that's just a story? So it's this interesting thing that we approach Christianity with, I have the end. Okay. Western, because I like what you said, Charlotte, about us starting with focusing on our Christianity in regards to our social location of Christianity. Because I can't speak to the Christian church in China. I don't understand the dynamics quite yet there. But here we have this tendency to highlight intellectual prowess and say, okay, I have the answer, therefore I must give you the answer, and all this good stuff. And there's way less invitation to discussion. Like, people just get so defensive. And I think whatever combats that, which is just deepening relationships and being vulnerable and stepping into that type of committed, practice, until we start doing that as a whole, we're not going to see any changes, and it's just going to regurgitate the same cycle.
Yeah, that's really well said, Greg. And when I go back to the Protestant Reformation, the specific shift that happened there was from church as authority to Bible as authority. But then that was a split from one doctrine to many warring doctrines, because the people who interpreted the Bible differently killed each other, and it was very bloody and very terrible. And so it's like, if that's what the printing press did, let's make sure the internet does something better. And so I think we should shift from, Bible as authority to love and community and relationship as authority. Because Paul said it's not, faith in the Bible. It's not works through your church volunteer work. It's love that actually is remembered into eternity. It's in Corinthians. And if we're going to really make that happen, part of love is respecting other people's experiences like they were your own. And like, the only way I can truly understand the Bible is if I interpret it through the lens of other people's experiences, right, rather than trying to say my experience of it is the only experience. And prior to the internet, we didn't actually even really have the tools to do that well, because how would you even find out what other people's perspectives were very easily? It would be, you only have access to the perspectives of published people, and publishing is really tied into the white, cis, hetero, patriarchy, capitalism machine. I hate publishing, even though I work in it. That's my critique of publishing. And so we finally have the tools we need to have a community-centered approach to spiritual authority. But because we're so trapped in, if I don't get other people to see my perspective as the only perspective, then I'm in danger. That mindset, which is just as rife in the ex-evangelical community as in the evangelical one, is what's going to sabotage the progress of this whole thing.
It's good. It's good. Man.
And ex-evangelicals can be alarmingly dogmatic because they've changed what the dogma is, but they haven't stopped proselytizing dogma. It's like, I believe that everything that I believed was wrong, and now you still have to agree with me or I'll be mad at you. And it's like, no, let's leave behind, you have to agree with me or I'll be mad at you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. You got some kudos. Good point. Publishers were gatekeepers too. Ovava, what is up? Good to see that name.
Fun story from the Martin Luther biography is he refused to accept any royalties or payment from his publisher because he was so grateful that his publisher was risking their lives in order to publish his pamphlets.
Nice. Yeah, I like, Charlotte, you brought the kind of the human nature, like the common tendencies we have, whether we're like on the progressive side or the like conservative side or whatever side we're on, that us and them mentality, and breaking through that as being one of the keys to whatever's next, to creating a more expansive, loving expression of Christianity. And I find that challenging because there are, like, my theology says actually all are welcome to the table, but in community and trying to create something different and that I think more accurately reflects the love hermeneutic and ethic you're describing. There are times where we're like, well, we're not cool with the people who say, I mean, we're cool with them individually. I'll treat them with respect and compassion. But like in terms of theological camps with the folks who exclude our LGBT plus siblings, like there's a line drawn, or women in ministry, whatever the hot button issue is. And so what are your thoughts on how to walk that tension? Like creating something that is it's the ethic of love that's the unifying thing, as Jesus says, and at the same time, when we get to these particular issues, everyone's going to have these different thoughts on it. Like, how do we create something different and not divide more? Yeah. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that when people say, like, if you compromise with us enough, then you will get more of what you want than if you stand up for your own perspective. I think that's a deception. I think you can't abandon your own perspective in order to get respect. You can only get respect by standing up for your own perspective. And so I think when churches say, well, if you would just stop advocating so fiercely for LGBT rights and women's rights and people of color's rights and just be a little more mellow and chill out, then we could totally get more reforms enacted because people wouldn't think you're so crazy. If only Lil Nas X didn't offend anybody with his satanic shoes, we would love LGBT Christians tomorrow. That's not true. You are not going to love LGBT Christians tomorrow if Lil Nas X had angelic shoes instead of satanic shoes. And since that is not true, why are you pretending it's true? So that it's just compromise with us more and we'll give you more. It makes me angry because it's a lie. And when we look historically at how progress has happened, that is not how it has happened. I'm sorry that I keep bringing this back to Martin Luther, but I'm obsessed with the book I've read. And so when he started publishing his critiques of the Catholic Church's actions, there was various political maneuverings to try and bring him back into line. And at one point, the bishop wrote to his boss and said, basically, bring your employee back into line, because he was a professor at a theological university. So they wrote to his dean or whatever. It's like, bring him back into line. And the dean wrote back this very polite letter, like, I would love to help you, but he's smarter than me, and I don't understand anything he says. And it's just it was a very diplomatic way to dodge the pressure from on high. But I don't think if Martin Luther had backed down, the Catholic Church would have become less corrupt. I think his lack of backing down was what caused the change. And so I think we can't fall. If we are determined to become truly inclusive, we can't fall for the lie that the way to do it is to compromise with the people who are utterly committed to lack of inclusion.
Yeah, so there's like a necessary break that needs to happen at times, and there's got to be some like set expectation. Like if you're gonna go down this path and create something truly different that pushes all of us forward, you have to be in tension with the other side at times, because that might pull them a little bit, like, but not compromising towards that. Yeah, I mean, every Reformation movement in the church history that's significant caused major conflict, whether it's like, St. Francis doing his thing or Augustine, like any of them. And so I think there's some expectation that it's going to be messy and there's going to be conflict, and hopefully the general trajectory is moving towards a more full expression of things. But
yeah, and hopefully less dead bodies this time. I'd like the conflict to be nonviolent on this round, and I feel like that can happen. But also, people depict reformers and revolutionaries as being at odds. Their efforts conflict with each other, and that's not true. Like, the reason the Catholic Church reads English Bibles instead of Latin ones is because Protestantism occurred. Like, it wasn't that, there were these crazy, native language Bible readers and they totally sabotaged the efforts of the Latin speakers to do gradual change. It was that the people on the outside actually gave the people trying to reform from the inside way, way more leverage, because the inside reformers was like, if we don't shape up, we'll just lose people to the outside. And so they just had a much more powerful argument. So over and over, I think the power systems tried to trick us by saying, like, don't be too revolutionary or you'll sabotage the reformers. But if you're called to be revolutionary, you actually make the reformers seem more reasonable by contrast to you, and you help the reformers. And that's something we need to, keep more of an eye on too.
Yep, I 100% agree with that. And I've seen that within not just like church communities and their broader networks, but also any like nonprofit work, like groups that are tied to Christian values. Like, there's like this huge controversy that happened with World Vision a few years ago, where they changed their policy and they made it okay to work for us and to be in a same-sex marriage. And then there's such a backlash that they had to, like, people stopped funding and stopped donating to like feed starving children and stuff because of this theological whatever position. And there's such a backlash. And so I've talked to people on the inside who are grateful for people on the outside who are like, the more work we do building a community explicitly in those ways, like the more credibility we offer to those on the inside working. So I think it is like a both and, for sure. And Luther didn't want to be a revolutionary. He wanted to be a reformer. Like he didn't want to cause this rift, but he was strong with his convictions. And flawed, deeply flawed, right? That's a deeply flawed human.
Yeah, my favorite part of the book was like reading this excerpt. Dear Pope, I'm sorry I called you the Antichrist. Can you forgive me? Can we still be friends? Like, why are you writing this letter? Obviously, the answer will be no. You don't really walk back from that.
But kudos to him for trying, all right? Because they're kind of call back to an earlier part of this conversation. We were talking about like community and why follow the church if there's a bunch of things wrong with it. What's different about the church, big C, versus an industry church, right? And it's this idea of the all are welcome to the table. So we have Alma Susanna mentions none of us are here to judge our neighbor, whatever the issue might be. I might belong to some category that someone may dislike. There will always be conflicts. And that's very true. We reference social groups that we're a part of, like, I'm a part of the A's. So inherently, if I'm not an A's fan, we're not going to be on the same team. Maybe we can find our love for baseball together. But then, but I like basketball, so we're not on the same team. So there's always going to be this division. There's always going to be this sense of angst, right? But with the call to love that we see and study in Christianity, that difference, even if you're a part of the problem, like there still has to be a break that you were talking about, Chris, with the intention of reconnecting somewhere, somehow. And I think the idea that someone is too far removed for that love that can exist if we're trying to live out what we're trying to live out. So there's always going to be this weird tension that even amidst the conflict, there has to be some type of, we got to connect somewhere down the line.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to always be the challenge, because then the question is, well, what does that look like? And that depends on the context. That depends on the relationship, whether it's individual, whether it's communal, whether it's systemic. There's going to be a bunch of varying perspectives. But the moment we say, "Up, you're cut," like indefinitely, I think we've just became a part of the problem.
Yeah, and holding that tension is hard work. And it's one of the reasons I think people will say things like, "Oh, the church is flawed, so I'm out." And sometimes that's true, but also alongside, and maybe even deeper, is this is just going to be too much work. Yeah, I'm out, but I want a scapegoat to be able to like point a finger and say, it's broken. And it's easier for me to just not have to engage with this. It's like which is part of the reason I think building the future of Christianity, at least in our context, the ways we're talking about, it's going to be hard. This ain't going to be like easy work. It's not going to be like posting some things on Facebook and we're done. It's like, it's a way of life. It's a sacrifice. It'll take a lot of us.
Yeah, and I support people who need to take a break to heal and grow and rediscover, or people who need to switch faith orientations to another faith orientation. A lot of ex-evangelicals go Wiccan, Buddhist, agnostic, or atheist. I feel like those are the most common choices after progressive Christian. So I have faith that people who need to take a break or need to change their spiritual orientation know what they're doing and they're walking with God. But what I don't believe in is despair, that like this thing I really value and love and need, which is spiritual community, there's no hope that I can find it. So I'm just going to give up and, live my life without this thing. Like I've had some very negative romantic experiences, and my reaction to them is not to say I will never have another romantic relationship. I am taking a break from romantic relationships to heal and grow and discover. But my expectation is that I will have a new one at some point. And if you're someone who craves spiritual community, I want you to have hope that that experience is findable for you, while respecting that spiritual trauma can be very deeply wounding. Like, I don't want to be judgmental of people's anger. I just want to be challenging of their despair. And the despair sometimes feels so thick, I can hardly breathe.
That's good.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
That's real good.
Yeah, I wish there was like a Twitter chat space, some sort of social media space that was explicitly there to be generative and constructive and like inspirational, aspirational, like not to like bypass the need for the anger, the critique to be there. I just don't see that in most of our current discourse, because I think it's been monetized so much, and what tends to go viral is controversy, conflict, calling out sorts of things, including the religious conversation. But if there was like a space where we could create like, hey, what do we hope and dream together? Like learning these lessons from where we've made mistakes. How do we move forward together? A lot of the progressive circles that I'm a part of, and I talk with other pastors about this, it's like one of the reasons some of the conferences are so tiring often is because it's just like, hey, this part of the church sucks, and so we're doing something different. But we stay on this part sucks, and we just like live in that forever. And whether it's the critique or the despair, I think there's a place for that. But like you were saying, like the hope is that we move forward. But that's harder work.
Yeah, and there are dozens of private Facebook groups that are for ex-evangelicals. The liturgist community, Litcom for short, the ex-evangelical group, probably lots more, but those are the two huge ones. And if you try and start those like, but what do we want conversations in those groups, people get really upset with you because they think that you're telling them that they should shut up about what they don't want. And they've heard that too much, and they still need to talk about what they don't want. And it's important to have a space to talk about what you don't want. But once you finish talking about that, it would be nice to have a space to go where you can talk about what you do want without people getting mad at you. And that's what's so stifling to me about the online conversation right now. Mm-hmm.
And I think like I've learned that not ultimately, but one of the approaches to that is just to go do it. Like, even if that space doesn't exist yet, let's just build this together. Like, and that's like I think about our little eclectic, beautiful church community. Like, it is not nationally known or famous or whatever, but it's remarkable, and we're doing it. And we didn't really wait for people to give us permission. We just started doing the work of the relational work of creating a healing space, hopefully a net healing space that reflects Jesus. And so even if that, like, on the social media, that conversation isn't there, in lived experience outside of online communications, as much as there's a utility to those online communications, I think we got to just do it. Like, we got to start building the places and having those conversations.
Yeah, that's good.
Charlotte, a really quick couple, I want to share a couple favorite Luther quotes or moments. One of my favorite things is how much he loved his wife, Catherine.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about how God blessed him because she was faithful. Like, she stood by him through this craziness, and she was a part of it too, but also because she was a really good beer brewer. And he talks often about beer. He talks a lot about beer, actually, which gets to one of the favorite quotes. While all this stuff was burning down and going crazy, he said, "As I sit here and drink this Wittenberg beer," like the city he was in Germany, "the kingdom of God advances." Like, all right, I'm going to have my beer. God's up to what he's doing. And actually, I got a chance to go to Wittenberg a while back, and you would love it based on this like read of the book and seeing it all firsthand. His body is actually buried in the church, one of the churches he was primarily like pastoring and speaking at. It's kind of bizarre, but is a unique human, and there's a lot of lessons to learn and parallels and some like differences as well. But if you were to forecast like your hopes, not like what practically you think's next, the next 20, 30, 50 years of Christianity here, but what you like, this is what I want to see. Like, if I could speak this into existence, this would be what I want. How do you describe that as?
Yeah, well, I don't want to glamorize Luther, even though I find him so interesting, because I acknowledge he said sexist and anti-Semitic stuff that was terrible, but I love learning about him and his life, and I do want to drink that Wittenberg beer someday. But yeah, I would say I want us to have our 95 Theses moment. I want us to craft that powerful, compelling, it'll probably be a webpage or a blog post that articulates the message of progressive Christianity so powerfully that the whole world is talking about it and can't ignore it. And I believe the 95 Theses moment is coming in the next 10 years. And then secondly, after that moment happens, and if we've prepared well enough for it, I want us to kick off a new way of doing discourse that is dramatically different from the way it happened in Luther's time, that is an inclusive and a loving discourse rather than a divisive one. Specifically, I think to craft this discourse, we can learn from Jewish midrash, which is full of disagreements and stays peaceful and generative. Like, any Jewish analysis of scripture you find online usually presents 10 to 12 viewpoints, which makes the Christian analysis you find online so boring by comparison, because it usually, just only represents the author's viewpoint, unless it's coming from an academic. And it presents the author's viewpoint as the only viewpoint, which is usually just like a total lie and is dry and dull and leaves me feeling deceived. And so there are specific traditions within Jewish midrash that I think we can learn from our older siblings in faith. We can learn from the people Jesus was born into. Like, Jesus was a Jew, Rabbi Jesus. And, a lot of the rabbinic tradition developed after Jesus passed away, but he was participating very richly in this tradition of friendly, peaceful debate. And we need to return to that tradition of friendly, peaceful debate to move forward and roll back all that anti-Semitism that caused us to overlook the tremendous wisdom that God built into the culture Jesus was born into. So that's what I would like to see happening, to have us have a platform to move forward and have these cycles of corruption and reform be less intense. Because if you have a better dialogue process, the corruption can't go as far.
Beautiful. It's a great note to end on.
Yeah, I mean, who can follow that? You know, Jeez Louise.
Yeah, the 95 Theses are coming. I think they are. Just keep an eye out for them. They're going to go viral. Hopefully, I think there'll be fewer than 95 because attention spans have shortened.
Yeah, 95 is a lot.
It's going to be like 9. That is beautiful. Oh, man. Yeah, a lot of good. A lot of good.
Well, thank you, Charlotte, for joining us. It's a fun little conversation. And we're going to be doing this Mondays at 4 in some form. We'll have this space like this. So if you're just checking in, hang out with us next week, too.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was so fun. Take care of your wrist, Chris. I'm so sorry that happened.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, that's a bummer. Yeah, if you're watching, pray for Chris. He needs all the healing in the world. Charlotte, what's the last thing you want to say to the Oak Life people before we sign off?
No one can take Jesus from you, and if they are gatekeepers to you, they're big fat liars. And just understand that you get to define your own relationship to Jesus however you want to define it.
Don't follow the big fat liars, Oak Life. Peace out.
Good.
That's it.